is surrounded by rising seas. This is going to happen to you, they tell you, if you do not implement the climate action plans. There will be sea level rising, there will be massive droughts, storm events, and hunger and disease and illness. If you do not accept wills and economies, we must expose the hidden secret of these corporations, universities, and institutions set to control all emerging technologies that will rebuild the world's transportation, civil, manufacturing, physical infrastructure with cyber infrastructure, computers, networks, and sensors. Now, many of you are noticing the cameras everywhere. They're on all the street corners, they're up the freeways, they're on buildings, they're everywhere. There's sensors everywhere. The surveillance in the United States has already imprisoned us. You can go to, you can look at Mount Weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R. It is a underground facility that was built outside of Washington, D.C., about 47 miles outside of Washington, D.C. in the 50s. And it houses the intention to incarcerate every single one of us with data collection and tracking and monitoring and sensors. So what you're hearing Edward Snowden say right now is not a new revelation at all. We were told in the Silent Weapons document exactly what they intended to do. And I'm going to just go over a couple of these things because I think it's vitally important that you understand the level of surveillance and tracking and monitoring that are planned. So on page 8 of the Silent Weapons document, they talk about the general concepts. But what they also talk about is the definition of a silent weapons system. And the definition, they say, is when a silent weapon is applied gradually, the public adjusts and adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, both psychological and economic, become too great and they crack up. They also tell us, therefore, the silent weapon system is a type of biological warfare. It attacks our vitality, our options, our mobility of individuals of a society by knowing. That's the data collection. That's Bluffdale, Utah. That's the cameras. That's all the tracking. That's the camera in your computer screen when you're sitting behind your computer. That is the flicker rate, and that's what's happening on your televisions. Everything that's coming wireless into your home. That's the wires within the walls of your home. It's all tracking. They talk about by knowing and understanding and manipulating and attacking our sources of natural and social energy and our physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. And they say that they will control it all. Now, what is also very important is what Rothschild discovered about energy. He said he discovered there was a basic principle of power, influence, and control over people as applied in economics. The principle is very simple. Quote, "When you assume the appearance of power, people soon give it to you." So we've had a great many people assume the position of power. And because we have been intentionally kept very busy, we have given our trust to those that represent us, and they don't. And as far as the data collection in this 44-page document, they talk about wanting to know, and keeping in mind this was put together in the 40s. And it was adopted at the very first Bilderberg meeting in 1954 in the Netherlands. And they wanted to know back then, in the 40s, about each and every single one of you. The what, where, why, when, how, and who. They were going to look at general sources of information. They were going to look at telephone taps. This is in the 40s. Analyzing your garbage. Surveillance. Behavior of your children in school. They were also going to know how you lived based on the food that you ate, the shelter that you lived in, the clothes that you purchased, the transportation. They also would know your phone bills because they would look at your itemized phone calls. They would know if you were married because they would look at your marriage certificates and birth certificates, etc. They would know your friends, your associations, your political affiliation. They would know your personal paper trail because they would know your banking account statements, your credit card purchases. Everything was tagged and planned to be tagged back in the 40s with the Universal Product Code. This is no new news. We didn't read this 44-page document, and we weren't in a school that told us any of this. And you are right now. And you can pull these documents down for yourselves, and I hope that you do, because that's only how you're going to learn what we can do. Now, as I proceed, it's going to sound a little bit daunting, and it is. And if you're concerned, that's good. You should be. But what we are also going to talk about are solutions. And that's the most important thing. But we have to work our way to the solutions, and we can't get to solutions without understanding what the problem is. So I'm outlining the problem, so I don't want you to have your chin on your chest too soon. Not too soon. They also talked in the silent weapons document that other methods of attaining data from us would be through our IRS forms. They said that if they gave us more write-off ability by putting more detailed information in the IRS forms, they could track and monitor us further. They also are using welfare, Social Security, USDA food stamps, and grants and subsidies. They say this: the principle for these ploys: the citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle. Eat now and pay later. We're paying dearly now for the information that our parents gave them, and we didn't know and they didn't know. But now you're learning, you're hearing in the documents. They also go on to talk about government sources via intimidation: the IRS, OSHA, the census, etc. They'll learn your patterns of living. Again, your belief systems, your contacts, how you vote, your friends, your strengths and weaknesses. And they tell us that they will keep the public ignorant. These are their words. This is in their document. They say they will maintain access to control and prices for feedback, and they will do shock testing. They will implode the economy, and they will charge us more through shock testing. They would know how we're receiving all this information based on the receipts and the amount of drugs and alcohol that we use. That would show our mental stability at that time. So very important to understand the depths of this document. They say they will destroy our opportunities and they will allocate our opportunities. They will control the economic environment. They will control the availability of raw materials. I just wanted you to understand primarily it's a declaration of war, and we're the enemy. What is also extremely important to understand is that the federal and state governments are not real. They're privately owned corporations called governments. And we'll get into more information so you can check into that. They're not real. They're privately owned corporations called governments. In other words, we have a system where we have banks and corporations that have been posing as legitimate governments, and they're not. It's USA Inc. In fact, it's Earth Inc. It's a corporate system. It's a corporatocracy. And we were left out of that lesson plan. We didn't know. And it's important to understand our judicial system serves the corporations, not us. That's why when we go to court, we generally don't prevail. And that's why the years that we spend in court and the money we spend in court, that money goes to the Federal Reserve, which has, of course, nothing to do with federal and has absolutely no reserve. Now, We must not consent to these lawless corporate statutes that were created to increase debt and enslave all of us, and that's what's happened. It's important to get a fundamental understanding of how this occurred, and we're going to have some references at the end that I would encourage everyone to take a look at so that you understand. Now, only 10 days before John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he gave a speech at Columbia University. And he said this, and I'm going to read it because I think it's so important, and a lot of people missed this one. But it says, quote, "For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system that has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations." We didn't hear that, we didn't read it, and we didn't know what that meant. Well, we're starting to feel more uncomfortable with what we all know is not real. And so when we think back and we look, we build upon history, and we've been denied history. The Silent Weapons document is a subversion of history. It is the creation of lawless laws. It is global manipulation of the population and enslavement by lack of knowledge. And unless we understand what our reality is, we're not going to be able to effectively oppose this. And that's what this is about this evening. This is the Iron Mountain Report. I recommend everybody listen to this document. Listen to the documentary. It's a blueprint for tyranny. It came out of the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was president. They commissioned experts to look at what the United States would look like if we should transition out of a time of war into a golden age of peace. And Kennedy was assassinated prior to the completion of this report. And when this report was given to Johnson, he said because of the content, it's never to be given to the American people. Well, a whistleblower leaked this document, and the government said it was a hoax. And all of our parents believed it. We were all too young, I think, to know. But our parents believed it was a hoax if they were not too busy to even know that it existed at the time. But I can say to you that it is a documentary that I would recommend everyone watch. In fact, we have some copies of the CD out on the desk. They're only $5. I would recommend that you buy it, make copies of it, get it out, show it to your neighbors. It's so important to understand this. And what is this? Well, the Iron Mountain Report talks about how they were going to subvert education. Exactly what Orlene and others in this room have been fighting so hard against. It talks about what we're now dealing with, the Obamacare. It talks about how they needed to invent a replacement for war. They needed something so horrific and so impactful that it would be believable globally and it would injure every single one of you, equal to the effects of war. So they decided that that needed to be invented, and they invented global warming. They said at the time that they would have to bring the ecology up to enough damage by damaging the ecology with the corporate structure. NASA and the corporations have damaged our world intentionally to seduce us into the false illusion that it's our fault, that we have to now believe in scarcity and we now have to rein in the population because there's too many of us. And that's what the report talks about, how they invented global warming and many other aspects as well. It is the second part I'm going to cut short because we don't have a lot of time. But again, in 1961, the Kennedy administration ordered a top-down secret study to determine the problems facing the United States if we were to go into a golden age of peace. The selection occurred, and there were 15 experts of various academic disciplines. They were selected for their expertise, and the first and last meetings were held in the underground nuclear survival retreat called Iron Mountain. This concluded in 1966, and as I said, Lyndon Johnson said because of the nature of the conclusions reached,